is the BLUETTI AC300. It's a 3,000 watt AC inverter, and it's designed as part of a modular home backup power system. And its capacity is, well, it's actually zero. It has no capacity. In order to actually store power in this thing, you need the B300 expansion module. So let me go get one of those. Oh my God, this is much heavier. Oh, this is a B300 expansion module for the AC300. And this is 3,072 watt hours of capacity. So you put these two together and you've basically got the beginning of a modular home backup system, which is very cool. So you got a 30 amp RV30 output right there. You've got a bunch of 20 amp ports here. I think there's 6 3-prong 20 amp AC ports. You've got some USB ports up here, including a PD100. And over here you've got a 24 volt 10 amp. Now, be aware that even though it's 24 volt, this will work with most refrigerators, most DC fridges. Most of them are bicompatible between 12 volt and 24 volt. Now you want to make sure if you have one that it is, but most of them are. So that's cool. And then over here you've got a 12 volt 30 amp little dual pin connector here, a little threaded aviation style 2-pin connector. So that's pretty cool. DC, these are all DC outputs. And it even has wireless charging on top. I'm not sure why you need wireless charging in a home backup solution, but it's got it. So it's got 2 wireless charging pads on top. But let's say you need more than 3,072 watt hours. What do? Well, you add another B300. Oh my gosh. Oh. Okay, I'm getting too old for this.
Getting too old for this shit.
Now we've got over 6,000 watt hours of battery capacity. All right, so let's talk about what we've got here. So both of these B300s, the B300s have their own 12 volt 10 amp car socket here. They come with a Type C PD 100 watt connector right there and a Type A quick charge 18 watt connector right there. In addition to these DC outputs, on the side here, these are all chargeable independent of the main unit with solar. So there's an XT90 solar connector on there, and it actually comes with an XT90 to MC4 cable. So let's take a look at the cables that come with this thing so we can just get a sense for what this thing is all about. Now the AC300 itself comes with this big bag here, and I'm not exactly sure what's inside, so let's take a look. All right, so a pretty large cable bundle. Got a bunch of different cables in here. All right, so you got a really big beefy 4-pin aviation style connector. Looks like two sets of MC4 connectors. So a big old solar cable. We have got a very large AC cable. And we've actually got, let's see, this is MC4 to DC input here. So I'm not exactly sure what this is for. So this is actually throwing me for a loop. It's obviously a solar connection here with this MC4 connectors, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this. So I'm going to have to look at the manual and figure that all out. All right, so we're going to run this thing through its paces and find out what kind of usable watt hours we can get out of this, what it's really suited for, how it really performs in a home backup power kind of situation. So let's report back in about 2 seconds. All right, took me a minute to figure out how the cabling works here to get the charging started. But as you can see, we are charging. It does say 70%. And I have got these things kind of daisy chained. If you can make this out, each one of these B300s comes with this huge cable here. And so there's a battery 1 and a battery 2 port on the main AC300. And there are the same 2 ports on each of the B300s. So in this dual B300 setup, you take battery 1 down here to the first battery 1 port on the first B300 expansion, and then you take battery 2 off the main unit down to the battery 1 on the second expansion. So both batteries actually plug directly into the AC300. That's a little bit different than how you would connect them, I think, if you have a 4 battery setup. But I'm not able to show that here. But anyway, yeah, so I'm just learning about this, got the thing charging. It is pulling 1,760 watts. So we'll take a closer look at the menu system, of course the software, how all the connections work, and we'll take a look at that in detail once we get it all charged up and we can start running some tests on this thing. Alright, so I got this AC300 and the two B300s here fully charged. We were at 100%, we're actually at 99% now. I've been running a discharge test for a little over 3 minutes. We're going to find out how many watt hours we can get out of the AC inverter that are usable versus that 6,144 of rated capacity. So I'm pulling, let's see, just under 1,400 watts. So that should be just maybe 4.5 hours or so, maybe 5 hours. We'll check back in about 5 hours and see how we're doing. Maybe we're done by then. Find out how many watt hours usable we can get out of the AC inverter. I am not going to do a DC discharge capacity test on this like I would normally do, because at 6,144 watt hours,
ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah, that would take a long time. So yeah, and besides, this is more of a modular home backup system. This is not really a focused on DC output, even though it does clearly have DC outputs. So we're not going to bother with that. We're going to focus on the AC inverter. We'll check back when this thing is completely depleted and find out what we got. All right, our AC capacity discharge test is done. Connect this to grid powered in order to view it. So we got 5,270 watt hours out of this total 6,144 watt hours. So that is a very respectable high average of about 86%. That is a very good number out of this 3,000 watt AC inverter. Okay, so I've got the AC300 pretty much fully loaded up. If we zoom in here a little bit, you can see we are at 2,960 watts. And the fans are on. It's a little warm in here, but I have to say this thing is really quiet. So let's check out how quiet this thing really is, even running at the full 3,000 watts. So we are well under 50 decibels. So this thing is basically whisper quiet. It's about the same amount of sound you would hear coming out of your, your register with the furnace on. So you don't really even hear the furnace. You just hear the sort of the rush of air. So nice and quiet. All right. So now that I got this thing fully loaded up here at 2,961, we're just like 40 watts shy. I'm going to go ahead and start the timer, and we'll see if this thing will run for 10 minutes straight at maximum load. And by the way, you can see, even though we're at maximum load, we're still putting out a solid 120 volts. So very good stuff. Alright, so ran the whole 10 minutes. You can hear the fans are a little louder than they were before. And I had the decibel meter up there, and you can see it crept up close to just under 60 decibels as it is right now. Still not crazy loud though for a 3,000 watt inverter, I have to say, and it's a nice white noise, so it's not a disturbing sound at all. Let me go ahead and remove my timer here. All right, so what I want to do now is I'm going to take it down a little bit, and then I'm going to turn on a heater that ramps up slowly. So we are going to see what happens when we slowly exceed that 3,000 watt continuous rating. Now it does have a 6,000 watt surge, but that's only for something in that millisecond time domain for compressor startups, pump startups, things like that. So, but it's not designed to run at 6,000 continuous. But let's find out where that threshold is, where we will actually get an overload trip. So let's see here. All right, so we are currently at 1,400 watts. Let's go ahead and add some load and get it up a little bit closer. All right, so we are at 2,300 and change. All right, let me go ahead and turn on my other space heater. We're going to watch that climb very quickly above 3,000, and we'll see if we can catch it where it cuts us off. So 3,000. All right, getting an alarm right now. We're at 36. and change, but we are still powering the load, so it's telling us it's going to trip. You can hear that alarm chiming. So we're at 3600 watts, and I imagine it's going to trip off here in just a second. We're still at 3587, so just shy of 600 watts over the continuous rated on this thing. That is some pretty good headroom. Just for fun, it's probably going to do it while I'm checking. If I go into the alarm, it does say inverter overload warning. I do like this touchscreen display. It is very intuitive and easy to navigate. Fans kicking back up. I can't believe it hasn't cut us off yet. Okay, so as you can see, I was powering one of my LED lights. So it did finally cut us off. Man, that was over a minute. I'll have to go back and check to see specifically how long we got out of that. But that's outstanding performance out of this AC300 on the load test. Yeah, so if you do trip the overload, and there goes my LED light again. If you do trip the overload protection, you do need to power it down, cycle power, to turn the AC inverter back on. So, good to know. All right, now that we know what the usable capacity is, let me charge this thing back up fully, and then I'm going to relocate it to the main house, and we're going to connect it to my ProTran 10-circuit manual transfer switch that I just recently installed. And we're going to basically power the house with this thing and find out what we can power for how long, and also kind of what other kind of features this thing has built in. I've been playing with this little touchscreen interface on it right before I started doing the discharge test, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty intuitive. It's got a lot of functionality. So we're going to dig into that and kind of figure out what all you can do with this thing. All right, got this fully charged back up right here, 100%. And I did just switch over my, where is it? My garage refrigerator. So I have that running off generator power here. And I'm going to switch my furnace up to generator power as well. So in the bottom position, as you can see, I'm running off line or grid power. In the middle is that circuit gets turned off, and in the up position, it's generator. So now I'm just going to try running just the furnace and the refrigerator. So two critical loads, and maybe I'll do the sump pump as well, because that could be considered a critical load. We don't want any flooding. All right, so with those three critical loads turned on and running off the AC300 with these two B300 expansions, we'll check back and find out what kind of runtime we can actually get with just those three critical circuits. All right, quick check on this. It's been about 17 hours, and we are at 16% state of charge. So you can see just running the critical loads here of my my furnace and also my garage circuit that has my refrigerator, and also it's got a freezer chest out there as well. So I'm running a refrigerator and a freezer. But you can see I got about 17 hours of runtime with this dual B300 configuration. So giving me a little over 6 kilowatt hours of capacity, and I still have 16% remaining. So I got about 17 hours of runtime on those critical circuits, and that also included my sump pump, by the way, which I didn't mention, but that didn't run all that often, even though it is raining quite a bit right now. But I have tested off camera, and in the interest of time, didn't really include it here, but just so you know, I can run virtually all of my 120 circuits that I have mapped over on that manual transfer switch and get a runtime of just around 12 hours, provided my wife isn't running her 600 watt stack of grow lights. That's one thing that will shorten that significantly. But that aside, that's important to know, because if you have a utility company in your area that supports time of use billing, where they have a peak rate for certain periods of time, and that may shift depending on what months of the year you're in, and an off-peak rate, using a system like this, you might actually be able to save a not insignificant sum of money by shifting your use for battery to the peak time, the peak rate time, and then recharging this thing during the off-peak time. And I'll get more into that in a minute. But let's take a look at the menu system and kind of see how you might set something like that up. If you click on any of these little icons over here, first of all, these ones on the bottoms are how you turn on the DC and the AC outputs. But if I had anything coming in on PV, which is solar panels, I could click on that and it would give me more information about the inputs. Now you notice there's DC1 and DC2. There's actually two separate dual MPPT charge controllers on this AC300, and I can put solar into both of those. Or I could put solar into one of those and I could charge with a car, for example, on the other. Now that's in addition to AC charging. This is just the DC input, and it would give me the volts and watts detail breakdown there. Same with the DC load. I can click on that and it'll tell me what I'm outputting on the various DC ports. And then of course, right now I've got an AC load here of 693 watts. You can see I'm outputting a full 120.1 volts, and it is inverter output. If I were plugged into grid, and depending on how I had this configured, it would show me that I've got grid output there instead. Now, if I go into settings, this is where things get really interesting, because you got the typical stuff where you can change the language, you can set your output voltage, you could set it to 100 volts. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but output frequency here in the US obviously should be 60 hertz. And then DC input source. Since it does have two separate charge controllers, it needs to know whether you're using it for solar charging or other DC charging. And other DC charging could be an external charge pack that you can buy for this, or like I said, you can use that strange car socket to MC4 cable, adapter cable that comes with to connect it to your car, and you would switch that. If you were using that other, you would switch it to other, and then that would take a car input instead of solar input. So that's how you would set that up. If I go into next here, I can switch it over from eco mode, which I have turned off. So that means it doesn't automatically shut itself down. I'm running in single phase, and I'm using my working mode. And this is where it gets very cool. It's set to standard UPS. And I'll talk about that in just a quick second here. But I want to point out max grid input current. If you're on a 15 amp circuit, you may want to set this to like 13 amps. You can actually go in and configure this in basic mode. So from here I can set that all the way up to 15 amps, or any increment down here, 13, 10, 7, and 5. So if I want to lower my charge rate, either to preserve battery life because maybe I have plenty of time and I don't need to be in a rush, so I don't need to charge at maximum rate, or I want to not trip a circuit breaker by exceeding a 15 amp circuit that's also powering other loads, I can reduce the total current draw. So this is very handy. Now that you notice there was if I go back into that, you notice there was an option to go into advanced mode. So if I have the special cable to handle the extra current, not just the one that it comes with here, I can get a password from BLUETTI and they will help me unlock a higher charge rate. It might even be 30 amps that I can charge at if you have a circuit that's appropriate to charge at that higher current. So that's an option. Now let's get into this really interesting thing here, this working mode. So standard UPS is the default, and that's where if you have it plugged into grid power, it's going to pass through and only switch over to battery if you have a power outage, if grid power is interrupted. But I have other options there. You can see I have time control, PV priority, and customize. So PV priority is where if I have solar panels coming in here, it will always prioritize solar power input coming in through the DC and run loads off that and charge the batteries off of that as long as there is sufficient power to do so off of the solar input. And when there is not, then and only then will it switch over to grid power. So it's designed to maximize the utilization of your solar array. Now, you can also, and this is where I mentioned that you can save a fairly significant amount of money if you have time of use billing from your utility in your area, and that's by setting up time control UPS. So I can come in here and say enable time control, but you can first of all set your state of charge limits. So it's really nice that you can set that in this unit. Now then you get into time setting, and this will give you up to 6 different time profiles or time periods where you can set it to charge or to discharge. Now if you're charging, then the load, any load connected here is coming off of grid power, right? And so I can have all of my loads switched over to generator, and as long as this is connected to grid power, it will pass through grid power, and as long as I have set it to charge, where it's charging the batteries. Now I would want to do that where you're charging the batteries during off-peak rates if you're using time of use, because the off-peak rates are going to be a lot less expensive in terms of cost per kilowatt hour versus peak rates. They're significantly higher, as you'll see in a minute. But then I can set my discharge time, which is let's discharge, which means I'm going to use battery power during the peak times. And you can set up the specific times here that correlate to that. So I hit the back button by mistake. But if I click next, I've got multiple pages. And as I mentioned, you can set up to 6 different time periods here. And so I'll go ahead and go back out of this. And you can see the other working mode that we would have. I've already talked about PV priority, but customized UPS. And that allows you to set kind of a combination of like PV priority and time control. But yeah, so this is a very powerful feature to give you access to some truly money-saving options with a product like this. So that is the touchscreen display. Very handy, very intuitive. You get the hang of it in about a minute, and you kind of know your way around. So good stuff. All right, let's take a quick look at the ports on the side of the unit here. So you've got your parallel connection ports here for battery expansion over here on the right side. These big, I think BLUETTI calls these fusion cables. So allowing you to connect up to 4 of these B300 expansions, as I said. And the B300s themselves have 2 of these sort of daisy chain parallel ports on them as well. Now, in terms of inputs to the unit, on the top, you've got the main AC input connection, and then you've got your 2 ports down here for DC inputs. Now, these are, again, for the 2 separate MPPT charge controllers, so DC1 and DC2. And by the way, these are rated for between 12 volts up to 150 volts on each of these ports. And so that's a 1200 watts each port to a maximum of 2400 watts total. So at 2400 watts, that would give you the ability to fully recharge, or very close to fully recharging, an AC300 with 4 of these B300s attached in 1 full day of full sun. So that's a pretty substantial amount of solar input that this can handle. Now looking at the B300 is capable of being a standalone DC power station all by itself. It's got those DC outputs that we talked about earlier. And on the side, you can actually recharge this via solar via this XT90 connector. Now this is 12 volts up to 60 volts for a maximum, though, of only 200 watts of solar. So you can't fully charge this from 0 to 100% on solar by itself in 1 single day. It would take you about 3 days to do that. Now on the bottom, it's got a DC7909 connector, and you can use that to connect, for example, a 500 watt external charging adapter. And this does dual charge, so you can charge it via solar and that external adapter if you wanted to at the same time, and that would allow you to charge this in something like 6 hours or so. Now this does also dual charge. You can dual charge this through the maximum AC input of 3000 watts plus the maximum solar input of 2400 watts for a total of 5400 watts of charging in a dual charge mode. That would be the maximum. And with that kind of charge mode, you could actually dual charge this thing from 0%, basically dead, all the way back to 100 in well under half a day if you actually maxed this out. So excellent options here for recharging this unit with all of its expansions. All right, let's wrap up and talk about what I mean when I say the AC300 B300 combo might actually be able to pay for itself. So first of all, the current sale price on the AC300 home backup system with those 2 B300s is $44.99. But, and I only recently learned about this myself, it actually qualifies in most cases for the 30% residential clean energy tax credit, which would bring the net cost down to just $31.50. And that's basically 50 cents a watt hour, which for something in this build quality and feature class already puts this combo way ahead of just about everything else that it competes with. And per usual, I will leave a link to this combo in the description below, along with a discount code for additional savings on top of those already great Black Friday deals that BLUETTI has going on right now for a limited time. And I'll put a link in there also for more information on the residential clean energy tax credit so you can see for yourself how that works if you're interested in checking it out. But I did say that it might actually be able to pay for itself. So how do I support that claim? Well, if your local utility supports time of use billing, then even without making an investment in solar panels, the AC300's time control UPS capability allows you to shift a fair amount of your on-grid power consumption to off-peak rates. So let's take a look at an example of how that math works. So here's an example I found from the utility Con Edison. Notice that the peak rate is 30.88 cents per watt hour and the off-peak rate is 2.18 cents per watt hour. Now that's a huge cost differential, at least for the 4 months out of the year that it applies. But for the other 8 months out of the year, In this particular example, the differential is a bit more modest, saving about 9.25 cents per watt hour. Now, assume you have the AC300 and two of those B300s for $31.49, again, after the tax credit, and assume that you're able to move just 5 kilowatt hours of power consumption, which is basically the usable capacity of the AC300 combo, move that to off-peak rates on a daily basis. Now that adds up to about 150 kilowatt hours per month that you're moving to off-peak rates. Now I'll spare you the eye chart on the math and the time, but the annual savings in this example for moving 150 kilowatt hours to off-peak time calculates out to about $282. And at that rate, it would take about 11 years to offset the cost of that AC300 combo. And yes, 11 years is a long time. But given the fact that the B300s should have a useful service life of well over 10 years, and you're not just getting a monthly savings on your utility bill, you're also getting the security and peace of mind of having an extremely capable power backup system for your home. It's kind of a no-brainer in my opinion, especially if you take the next step and add some solar recharging into the equation. Now, you do have to have a transfer switch to tie all that into, and since a number of you guys have commented that you're interested in seeing how I did that, I'll be doing a how-to video on that very soon. And of course, your actual utility rates will dictate whether the math is more or less favorable in your particular situation. But regardless, I do think this is a fantastic system and definitely worth looking into if you're wanting a versatile home backup power solution that can grow as your needs do. Now, do also keep in mind that this AC300 combo is 120 volts only. So what do you do if you need to run 240 volt loads, like maybe a central air conditioner, electric oven, or electric water heater? Well, there's a dual AC300 solution for that as well, and I'll be covering that detail in my AC300 follow-up video next month, so I do hope you'll consider coming back to join me for that one. Okay, I think that's a wrap. I do hope you found at least something helpful in the video, and if you did, please consider clicking on that like button for me. I'd very much appreciate that, and if you're not already a subscriber, well, you know what to do. I've got a bunch of cool projects in the video queue, and maybe you'll find those, or maybe some of the videos I already have on the channel, helpful in some way. You do have my sincere thanks for stopping by and watching the video with me, and I do hope you'll consider joining me for the next one. Until then, have fun out there.